Good evening and thanks so much for joining us. I'm Brittany Ramsey. We begin with the district's latest COVID-19 numbers tonight, which remain at very low levels. Just 2 new cases were reported by the health unit today, and that includes Saturday and Sunday cases as well. One is linked to travel outside northwestern Ontario. The other has no known exposure. Both are in the Thunder Bay area. Meanwhile, the active case count is back into single digits at 9 after 3 previous cases were deemed resolved. 2 new variant cases have also been identified. The regional hospital has 8 COVID patients, 4 are in the ICU, and the hospital is about 81% full overall. Meanwhile, Ontario is reporting 210 new cases today. The latest data shows more than 77% of adults now have at least 1 dose of a COVID vaccine, and 35% are now fully vaccinated. As the province prepares to move into step 2 of its reopening plan, there are growing calls for more government support for struggling businesses. Colin DeMello reports.
As the economic reopening ramps up, the business community says the provincial government needs to scale up its support, saying just 38% of businesses are currently making their pre-pandemic income in Ontario, while the vast majority are still feeling the impacts because of closures and capacity limits.
A restaurant that has a patio and indoor dining cannot access that indoor dining right now, so that's a huge revenue hit. Others, for example, in the tourism industry, haven't seen their customers come back yet. Borders are still closed. People aren't really traveling within Ontario just yet. So there are still a lot of other pandemic factors that are playing in.
The government has been facing calls to offer businesses a third round of support payments to give them a soft landing after the reopening. That would cost an estimated $1.7 billion on top of the $2.9 billion in grants the government has already made available. But the finance minister has so far declined, claiming the best way to stimulate the economy is to reopen businesses. Critics say that's not the case.
It's not like turning on a switch and the doors are open and you're working at full throttle. And the finance minister should know that, especially for the small local businesses, especially for the ones that are going to continue to have restrictions in terms of customers.
Now there are calls for a long-term strategy so businesses know when all restrictions will be lifted.
There are wedding venues, concert halls, conference centers that are also small businesses, and they need a lot more lead up time to be booking acts or events or weddings to come in. And, at 25%, not necessarily worth it for the venue that can seat, 800 to 1,000.
The province has not said when COVID-19 capacity limits will be completely removed.
Well, the Premier was asked today why the province is not yet fully reopening based on dropping numbers and high vaccination rates. Here's what Doug Ford had to say.
I'm a business person. I'm balancing the economy between healthcare. Without the health, we don't have an economy. Again, folks, there's no one that wants to open this economy up more than I do. I think we're pretty well 90% there, but it's not good enough in my opinion. So just hang in there. We'll be talking to the chief medical officer, and I'm going to do everything we can safely. I want to repeat safely, open things up. It's absolutely critical.
The Premier added the province needs to be cautious with the highly transmissible Delta variant. Meanwhile, the Thunder Bay Regional Health Sciences Centre has announced that it will be easing restrictions as COVID-19 cases have dropped in this area. Christian Apostolowski reports.
The announcement of restrictions easing at the hospital comes as there are just 9 active COVID-19 cases in the Thunder Bay district. Executive Vice President Peter Voros spoke about what moving into yellow means for the hospital and its patients.
Sure. So throughout the pandemic, as we've moved through things getting better and worse, we always look at our internal pandemic response color code. So as you know, last week we went from red to orange, and this week we've decided to go from orange to yellow. So the color code system for us in the hospital is really a trigger for us to look at various aspects of care within the hospital and make decisions about what's next and what we need to be doing.
As the hospital moves into yellow, officials will begin reaching out to those who had delayed surgeries and begin to clear their backlog. Voros says it's about maximizing the use of operating rooms, not just in Thunder Bay, but also in the region.
People have not been going to their primary care doctor. And so throughout the province, we anticipate that there are going to be people coming forward who need surgery that we don't yet know about. And often family doctors keep waiting lists before they refer. So we know how many we have on our waiting list right now, but throughout the province, we really recognize that there's probably a lot more people who will be needing surgery as people actually start to go to their doctors. So we anticipate it will take us at least a year or more to clear backlog.
Voros says it's not only about the numbers when the hospital considers moving into green, which would be closer to the beginning of the pandemic response. He also says he is hopeful that shortly they can make that shift. Krishna Postolevsky, TBT News.
St. Joseph's Care Group has announced the hiring of its next president and chief executive officer. Kelly O'Brien will be taking over in early September. Current St. Joe CEO Tracy Buckler announced in December that she'll be retiring after 16 years at the helm of the organization, which has more than 2,000 employees around the city. O'Brien has held senior executive roles in healthcare since 2005 and is currently a vice president at Western Health in Newfoundland. She'll be working with Buckler on the transition until September the 7th.
For me, the mission of St. Joe's Care Group, meeting the unmet needs of the people of Northwestern Ontario, really resonated with me, as certainly did the values of care, compassion, and commitment. I really will be focused on meeting people, learning about the programs and services, and recognizing that the programs and services serve the people not just of Thunder Bay, but the entire region. So really looking to connect with the community, with internal stakeholders and external stakeholders. Those would certainly be my initial focuses when I arrive.
O'Brien says she's very excited to relocate to Thunder Bay and believes the St. Joseph organization aligns very well with her own experience. Well, tonight, Thunder Bay City Council will hear what progress has been made over the last year on recommendations from the 7 Youth Inquest and what still needs to be done. The update comes 5 years to the day after the jury issued its list of 145 recommendations to help prevent future deaths of young Indigenous people. 31 of the recommendations were directed at the city. So far, it's implemented 28 of them. The 3 outstanding recommendations are in various stages of completion. They include a wayfinding path that better reflects the Indigenous presence in the area, a social media campaign to address racism and other challenges faced by Indigenous students, and the establishment of a 4th safe sobering site. Also, tonight, City Council is being asked to approve a new 5-year community safety and well-being plan. Some of the top priorities are to decrease anti-Indigenous racism, reduce homelessness, and establish a mental health and addiction crisis center. A Kenora Area First Nation is asking the city to change its plans for celebrating Canada Day in light of recent burial discoveries at former residential schools, and that request has now been granted. Over the last month, the bodies of close to 1,000 children have been discovered in unmarked burial sites in both BC and Saskatchewan. It's prompted many people to request that Canada Day celebrations be curtailed out of the respect for the period of mourning. Here in the Northwest, there were 9 residential schools, including 2 in Kenora. Shoal Lake 40 sent an open letter to the city this past weekend saying that if its Canada Day fireworks go ahead, the band will ask Grand Council Treaty 3 to remove its flag from Kenora City Hall. Earlier today, Kenora officials tweeted plans to hold a fireworks show in the local harbor on July 1st. However, city officials have now announced that the fireworks will be postponed in response to the First Nations call. Meanwhile, Thunder Bay residents who registered for a Canada Day kit from the city were able to start picking them up today. City officials have chosen not to hold a fireworks show or a large in-person gathering this year due to COVID-19 restrictions and out of respect for Indigenous communities across Canada. Instead, they're giving out Canada Day kits, which provide self-guided programming and activities such as science experiments, art projects, scavenger hunts, and cookie decorating. Registration for the kits ended this past weekend. Cultural Development and Events Supervisor Louisa Costanzo says the kits will be linked to online videos on July 1st.
For sure. So I think, well, the Science North one will be a guided video, so a virtual or online video, and then it will go through the steps on how to make the solar oven, for example, and then show people how to put it together and then show people how to use it as well.
More information can be found under the Canada Day tab on the city's website. Meanwhile, city officials have confirmed that free live concerts will be returning to the Thunder Bay waterfront this summer for the first time in 2 years. The Live on the Waterfront concert series is scheduled to begin July 14th at Marina Park. No details about the lineup of performers have been released yet, or about capacity limits or COVID protocols that will be in place. City officials say more information will be released next week. Under the rules for Step 2 of the province's roadmap to reopening, outdoor performances and live music are allowed with spectator capacity at 25%. The capacity limits are higher under Step 3, which is currently scheduled to begin on July 21st. That's the night of the second waterfront concert, which happened every Wednesday from 6 until 9 o'clock. Traffic in the Edward Street and Redwood Avenue area has been further reduced to accommodate the construction of the new roundabout, which kicked off today. Southbound traffic on Edward will stop at Redwood and then be diverted to the west, while northbound traffic on Edward is being detoured around the construction zone. This phase of construction is expected to last 4 to 5 weeks, but is subject to potential delays due to factors like weather. Businesses within the construction zone remain open and can still be accessed by using Redwood Avenue or following posted detour routes. City project engineer Matthew Miedema explains what steps are next for the project.
Yeah, so once the roundabout is done there, they'll be pouring the islands, like I said, and they'll be paving the intersection, and then most likely they'll continue on with the work north of the intersection up to Ironwood, and eventually to James William intersection. So there's still some more water main work to take place up to Ironwood, and then repaving all the way up to James.
Miedema says the next phase will take them into September or October, at which point the crews should have everything cleared up and ready for all traffic. Nokiwan Tribal Council is celebrating its 15th anniversary in a tasty way with its first ever drive-through fish fry. The 3-day event started this morning in the parking lot of the organization's headquarters. Over 160 members from the 5 Nokiwan First Nation communities, along with partners and local dignitaries, were invited. Almost half attended on the first day. Guests were able to drive through a series of pit stops to receive food, gifts, and greetings from Nokiwan staff. The gifts included donuts with the tribal colors and freshly baked bannock. The star of the event was the walleye fillets, which were freshly fried outdoors. Nokiwan Executive Director Audrey Gilboa says in light of everything that's been happening in our country, this event is a way to pause and come together as a community in a safe way.
As Indigenous people, we really, one of our core values is being together, comforting each other, and food is always central to that. And it's one of our key things at Nokiwan we do. We try to demonstrate care and concern for others. And feeding people seems to be the most natural way to do that.
We are here celebrating our 15th year anniversary, and yet there's the current events that are having a lot of effect on our First Nation members around us. So we do that with respect, and we recognize that we must acknowledge and recognize that too. And so as a First Nation organization, we have to keep smiling, we have to keep celebrating, and that's what we're here to do today.
Bannon says 130 pounds of fish is being cooked for the celebration. He adds that events hosted by Nokiwan are always well received by community members, but especially this one. The drive-through event will continue until Wednesday afternoon.
Well, Fiona, it was a decent start to the day, but on the way to work this afternoon, the clouds saw them making their way in.